Random House Audiobooks presents I Haven't Understood Anything Since 1962 and Other Naked Truths by Louis Grizzard. Read for you by the author.
I haven't understood anything since 1962. One of the few introductions to literature that's worth listening to. I had a handle on things in 1962. It was the year I turned 16 and got my driver's license. I'd never heard of Vietnam in 1962. I didn't know that eating fried foods was bad for me. Whenever I wanted French fries in 1962, Mama would cut potatoes by hand and cook them for me. Movies hadn't become films. Most of them still made sense, and nobody in them, unless they were made in Sweden, got naked. I slept well in 1962. But the very next year, somebody shot the president. Soon after, I saw the alleged assassin shot dead on live television. Then, the Beatles came. Then, all hell broke loose. Changes began to unravel my simple, neat world. The national television news went from 15 minutes to a half hour because there was more bad news to announce. And it didn't stop there. It began to steamroll over me. So much of what I had been taught was right suddenly was wrong. Girls wanted to be in the Boy Scouts. Later, homosexuals wanted to be in the Boy Scouts. The isms came. Racism, sexism. The phobias came. Homophobia, xenophobia. Causes sprang up faster than I could keep up with them. Save the whales. Nuke the whales for Jesus. Hippies. Drugs. Punk rock. I had 3 friends killed in Vietnam. I managed 3 divorces by 1982, and then began going out with women who looked at me like I was crazy when I asked them to fry hand-cut French fries for me. A lot of good people got assassinated. A lot of bad people got off too easy. I was switching through the cable one day and came upon MTV. Good God. I was reading one day and came upon the name of some sort of rock music group called the Butthole Surfers. Do what? It's been 30 years since 1962. I'm 46. Haven't forgiven the Japs of Pearl Harbor. Have tired of all the movements that just won't go away. Remain convinced Bernie Getz did the right thing when he shot those punks in the New York subway. Still write on a manual typewriter. Despise computers. And I still don't have a clue what it is women really want. This is dedicated to everybody just like me. The Lord have mercy upon us. The Speech Police. I keep thinking about Earl Butz. Poor old Earl. He was the first victim of the Speech Police, or at least the first I can remember. Earl Butz was Secretary of Agriculture under Gerald Ford. Earl told a joke one day in 1976. It was in the papers and on television, and Earl Butz lost his job as Secretary of Agriculture because he told a joke. It was a racial joke. I'm not going to repeat it because it's not that funny. And I want to make all the wimpy pansy asses who are going to faint when they hear some of the things I'm going to say later listen a little more before they faint. Anybody holding a position like the one Earl Butz had should have been smarter than to tell a joke like that in public. But that's not the point. The point is Earl Butz was the first victim of the modern-day Speech Police. The media is no longer of its right mind. When the New York Times and the Washington Post brought down Richard Nixon, it started an entirely new sort of journalism in this country, which goes something like this. Sooner or later, that son of a bitch is going to say something we can nail him to the cross with, so don't let him out of your sight. How many have fallen since to those watchdogs of people who have thoughts and then have the audacity to speak them? Jimmy the Greek Snyder, the legendary bookmaker, mentioned breeding when he was speaking of the African-American professional athlete. The Speech Police got him fired from his job with CBS Sports. Poor old Andy Rooney said something the homosexuals didn't like, and CBS suspended him. Al Campanis, general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, said African-Americans lacked buoyancy. He lost his job overnight. Before going any further, allow me to explain just who the speech police are. At the top is the New York Times and the Washington Post. If anybody who is anybody says anything they regard as racist, sexist, gay bashing, or any kind of bashing, they carry large stories about it. Just under the Times and the Post are the television networks. Next come spokespersons for whatever or whomever the Times or Post has said has been bashed. The president of the National Association for the Advancement of Left-Handed Lesbian Crossdressers who want to marry each other and adopt pet squirrels calls a press conference, which the Times and the Post cover. He or she expresses outrage and calls for the head of whomever has been collared by the speech police. After these people come activists, people who have a lot of time on their hands and go around looking for things to be offended by. You can't go around trying to be offended if you have to work so you can eat and sleep out of the rain. Add all of these people together and they amount to a minuscule percentage of the entire population. But that doesn't matter. Since they control all the newspapers and television networks, they also have the floor at all times, and the rest of us never get a chance to be recognized. But one might ask, what about conservative politicians? Oh, one might slip and say he or she doesn't believe in racial quotas and suggest the welfare system needs changing. But an aide to the politician will say, I don't care if that's the way you feel. You just can't say things like that anymore. That's what the speech police finally have done. They have made the American tradition of speaking one's mind almost a hanging offense. How the speech police managed to deal with truth is they started something called political correctness, which is fairly simple to define. It means keep your mouth shut even if it's true because we don't care about truth anymore. What if somebody asks you, what do you think of welfare mothers who continue to have babies out of wedlock because they can get more benefits that way? The politically correct answer would be, the government should buy her a roomier Cadillac. Perhaps some sort of disclaimer is necessary at this point. 1. I don't want to put black people in the back of the bus again. The civil rights movement was the right thing to do, and the courage of those involved set an example for all humanity. But I'm tired of racism as an excuse. More black men are in jail than in college. Black leaders blame white people for that. And as long as there is somebody else to blame, nothing gets done about the problem. Black politicians get caught stealing. It's a racist plot, somebody cries. Marion Barry? It was white people who put that cocaine in his pipe. Racism is such a convenient excuse. Get caught and you can always explain it away. The truth is, some black politicians steal, just like some white politicians. Racism will never die indeed until it ceases to be used. 2. If a woman can do the job of a man, she should be given an equal chance to get that job and receive the same pay as a man would receive if he held the position. I still have a little problem with women on the golf course who won't pick up and move to the next hole when they reach double or triple bogey, but that's a minor thing compared to the larger question of women's rights in the workplace. 3. Homosexuality really doesn't bother me until it spills into the streets or is flaunted at me. God gave us the motel room so he wouldn't do things like that. I sort of feel the same way about heterosexuality, although not as strongly. Political correctness has gotten out of hand. The speech police have gotten out of hand. They are stifling expression. Lord knows there is such a thing as good taste and manners, and there's also such a thing as individuals holding lofty positions using good judgment. I'd rather a few folks get away with remarks better left unsaid than to make it frightening to open one's mouth for fear of offending the 10 million minority and special interest groups whose antennae are always up to find an offending tongue. The speech police has had its way with me on a number of occasions. The Washington Post once interviewed me for their style section. The first paragraph said there were a lot of things I didn't like. Bossy women were mentioned. So were homosexuals. And, quote, blacks, especially poor ones, close quote. I was horrified. Where had that come from? I was positive I'd never said or written anything that would imply that. Simply because I think the public teat goes out to too many who are undeserving, does it necessarily follow I don't like poor black people? I don't like Jesse Jackson, but he isn't poor. I don't know who writes his checks, but I know he wears expensive suits and somehow is able to show up anywhere in the world where he thinks there's a TV or photo opportunity for him. But poor black people? With whom did the Washington Post get me confused? I've never worn a sheet. There was nothing in the article to back up the statement in the first paragraph. Nothing. Speech police brutality is what I call it. Guilt by geography. My only purpose here is to say, let's relax all this new sensitivity a little before we all have to get our jaws wired shut because we're afraid that no matter what we might say, some son of a bitch is going to take offense. There is also something else I wanted to say. Do you realize there is only one group of citizens it is okay to stereotype and make fun of and be able to get away with it and not bring down the wrath of the speech police? This group is known as rednecks, bubbas, good old boys. You can say or write whatever you want to about them. I've been called a redneck, that and its cousin, good old boy. It doesn't bother me, and I much prefer it to liberal, intellectual, or president of the National Association of Weenies and Wimps. I'm probably just as bad as some people think I am in at least some areas. I'm more anti-pompous, anti-rock music, and anti the idea of eating raw fish than I am the racist, sexist, and all that other stuff. But yes, I do wonder who pays Jesse Jackson. I don't trust women with hyphenated last names wearing suits, and I attempt to avoid restaurants with homosexual waiters. And this is no act. It's real. It's me. And know what else? I think there are a lot of people like me, sick of the speech police, sick of being afraid to speak the truth, sick of groups like the Queer Nation, the ACLU, and the National Association of Women who would just like to beat the hell out of every man they see. Sick of whining more than anything else. Whine, whine, bitch, bitch. It's become a national pastime. Listen on, if you dare. Straight Southern male seeks anyone who understands what the hell is going on. Once I put an ad in the personal section of the newspaper. I had never done such a thing before, but I was desperate. I couldn't get a date. There I was, alone. That situation certainly wasn't new to me. I'd already lost 3 wives and countless other girlfriends, but I remained convinced that if I continued to persevere, I at last would find a woman with whom I could have a relationship. First, of course, I had to decide exactly what I wanted. I didn't want a woman my own age. Women my own age usually have been divorced a couple of times and hated men. So what I decided I wanted was a woman, say, between 23 and 28. I wanted her attractive, of course, with no tattoos, with no previous acting experience in porno films, but with an active sexual imagination. And how about this? A home economics major in college. Fry that chicken, mash those potatoes, be still my heart. Young, attractive home ec major. No porno experience, but will wear things at night with feathers on them and has no earthly idea male sex organs come in different sizes. And where has she been a home ec major? That was very important. I am a graduate of the University of Georgia, so my first choice would be a young, attractive, willing to be kinky home ec major from the University of Georgia. We could go to all the Georgia Bulldogs football games together, and she wouldn't think getting down on one's knees and barking at a Clemson fan was odd behavior. But then I realized I also would have to describe myself in the ad. I'm straight, I'm white, I'm male, but I'm also Southern, and it was very important I got that across. My ad finally was ready. I phoned the classified ad department of the newspaper. "Can't get a date, huh?" the female voice said. "Well," I answered, "it's just that, what do you want to say in your ad?" the woman asked. I told her. "Oh, no," she said. "What's the matter?" "Everything is the matter. You're an SSWM, a straight Southern white male." The words came out like she was spitting out rodent hairs. "What's wrong with being one of those?" Everything is wrong with being one of those, she said. Straight, white Southern males are the most politically incorrect individuals we have in 90s society. Are you saying you're not going to accept my ad? I asked. Listen, you redneck, the woman said, her voice now dripping with venom. If you've got the money, I'll run your ad, but you're wasting your time. No woman in her right mind would answer an ad to meet slim pickings. I was shocked beyond words. I was suddenly some sort of monster, some outcast. Still, she had said if I had the money, she would run the ad, and I wasn't convinced I was some sort of social leper, despite what she had said. I finished the rather harrowing experience with the woman in classifieds at the newspaper who said my ad, as much as she despised it, would run 2 days hence. The anticipation was building. This could change my life. I was certain the letters would come pouring in. I got 4 responses the first day. One said, "Hey, trucker, I'm southbound and down. My leather lathers with anticipation." Another read, "I'm 6'2", 190. Pains my game and I know chickens. Yours in Christ." Obviously, both these individuals had mistakenly written to the wrong P.O. box. A third letter wanted to sell me aluminum siding, and the fourth was a pyramid scheme. It had to get better. It didn't. I received only one more letter after the initial 4. It was from Jimmy Swaggart asking me for a donation. Naturally, I was devastated. What had happened here? My ego had crashed. I was the epitome of politically incorrect, a redneck, a good old boy. My name was Bubba. What are straight Southern white males supposed to do now we've been cast aside like an old sofa? We're still part of this society. I like to think we're still contributing to it. Who would change your oil and clean out your carburetor if it weren't for straight Southern white males? Who would write country songs like a friend of mine is writing with the title, "I Can't Get Over You Until You Get Out From Under Him"? Who would coach football at the University of Mississippi? Who would eat all the pork pig barbecue sandwiches and drain all those long-necked bottles of Bud? Who would be governor of Alabama? Who would love, with a nod to Tom T. Hall, old dogs, children, and watermelon wine? Who would put a car up on cement blocks in his backyard, go to stock car races, and keep bait and beer stores in business, thus helping to stimulate the economy? Who would buy a pickled egg from the jaw on the bar? Who would love truck stops and beer joint waitresses and give them change to play Alan Jackson's "Don't Rock the Jukebox" on the jukebox? Who would love and take care of sorry old dogs who sleep under trucks and get motor oil on their backs? Who would name bird dogs Jim and Jesse and own a decanter of bourbon in the shape of Elvis? Who would say, "I heard that," and "Now there's a nice one there, a real nice one," on televised fishing shows? Who would chew tobacco and carry around a paper spit cup with a napkin in it? Who would still say "tote" for carry, "salmon" for salmon, and "bullshit" for "you don't say"? Who? Tell me who. Us. Straight Southern white males. Hey, we need love and understanding too. And once you get to know us, we aren't what the cat drug in from the garbage. We're people too. We have feelings just like everybody else. And we're damn tired of being looked down upon and having our political balance being called the Bubba vote. I press onward. Most of us work for our living. Some of us work very hard. We also pay our bills and our taxes and provide for our families. Certainly we have a share of goofballs and ne'er-do-wells. What group, ethnic or otherwise, doesn't? But we have one distinct unifying factor. We don't know what's happened to the world. In a few words, we are confused and angry. I've already said what I thought about political correctness. I said it sucks, the big one, if you don't recall. And if you think I'm enjoying speaking my mind here and telling the speech police to go to hell, you're right. This is more fun than playing with a pet chicken. I did eat mud, but I always buttoned both galluses. How I became a white Southern male is rather simple. My father was one. His name was Louis McDonald Grizzard, same as mine. Quite a coincidence, I'd say. His father was a white Southern male, too, and he was a farmer. This may be startling to those whose knowledge about the South has come only from the movie Gone with the Wind, but my grandfather didn't own any slaves, except for his 12 children, all of whom were white, like he and my dad. I've attempted to tell individuals from outside the South that, but they never seem to believe me. But just as fiercely as I want to explain I sprang not from Tara, I also want to point out I neither fall into the category of white trash either. Perhaps I should explain white trash before I go any further. White trash in my youth was looked down upon. Their work ethic wasn't too strong, and their personal hygiene was questionable. A lot of these people lived in trailers, too. 14 kids all over the porch and yard, half of whom were naked, was a distinct white trash characteristic. The males of white trash households were normally what my grandfather called sorry, as in they wouldn't work, shave, bathe, attend church, or button up both galluses on their overhauls. The Lute Starkins family were a classic white trash family. There was Lute and his wife, Clovis. Then there were the 12 little Starkins. The boys were named Lute the Third, Coot, Toot, Boot, Goot, Root, and Poot, the youngest. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Starkins named one of their children Poot. In their defense, however, they did not realize Poot was a term for flatulence. So there were 7 boys in the Starkins family. The 5 girls were Clovis, the oldest, followed by Clovis May and Clovis Sue, and then there were the young twins, Lutine and Lutette. All the girls were accomplished fighters as well, as they faced daily battles to fight off their brothers' advances every time they were sent to the creek to get a bucket of water. Clovis, as a matter of fact, is the only Starkins I was able to keep up with after I left home. She became a famous professional woman wrestler who went by the name of the Masked Turnip, and once whipped a male wrestler, Chopper Gaines, in an exhibition match in Baltimore. Clovis went for Chopper Gaines' eyes at the beginning of the match and rendered him temporarily blind with 2 quick finger pokes. Naturally, Chopper complained to the referee regarding this tactic, but while he had his back to Clovis, she went into the audience and picked up a metal folding chair and brained him with it. In professional wrestling circles, they still speak of how long it took to stop Chopper's bleeding and how Clovis also wound up whipping both the referee and the ring announcer before she finally was convinced to go to her dressing room. It was a sight to behold to drive by the Starkins' home while all the children were home. At least half of them were in the front yard naked most of the time, as I pointed out, a classic white trash trait. And at least one of the boys would have on one of his sister's dresses that Mrs. Starkins had made from a feed sack, because the other boys had on what few pairs of pants and shirts were available. I don't know if there's any classic white trash still around the South anymore. Regardless, they wouldn't refer to them as white trash anymore. Now they would be called dumb rednecks. Individuals from other parts of the country who avoid work at all costs, have children in double figures, and allow some of them to run around naked, are called underprivileged or poverty-stricken. There is an underclass in the country, and the rest of us need to help them. Free condoms and jobs cleaning up New York City and Washington, which are both terribly filthy, would be a great start. But this isn't about curing social ills. It's about being a white Southern male who has ridiculous, insensitive ideas like the one I just expressed, which also is probably racist somehow and an affront to homosexuals who live in house trailers. Stop me before I offend again. No, I didn't grow up white trash. My mother was a college-educated school teacher. My father was an Army officer before he lost his battle with an amber liquid. My parents had only one child, me, and I was never allowed to run around naked. We might have been poor by today's standards. Mother made a whopping $125 a month teaching in one of the county schools in 1953. But we had my grandfather's garden, and there were plenty of chickens to lose their heads and become Sunday dinner. There was a report in a national publication not long ago that some Southerners, even today, eat mud. Well, I must admit I did once eat some mud. I was 4 and it had rained, and I started playing in a puddle. I picked up some of the mud, and it felt so good in my hand, I decided it probably tasted good, too. So I put some in my mouth, but I didn't swallow it. It tasted too gritty. I never tried to eat mud again. I loved growing up the way I did. I was raised by good and humble folk who tried to teach me right from wrong. Want a good example of how a straight Southern white male thinks? Okay. When John Lennon was shot, it was like the president got it. It went on for days. I was sorry John Lennon was shot, but John Lennon once posed naked on an album cover with his wife. Country singer Marty Robbins never did anything like that, and when he died, you barely could find his obituary in the newspaper. And he sang El Paso and Devil Woman, both of which I think are better songs than anything the Beatles did. See now what you're dealing with here? Just 'cause I'm afraid of copper-headed water rattlers don't mean I'm a pissant. Most all straight Southern white males spend their entire lives trying to avoid being pissants. Nearly all Southern coaches use that term pissant to cast aspersion upon their athletes. There are other things Southern coaches call their players: dingleberries, maggots, and piles of cow, possum, whale, dog, and goat dung all come to mind, but pissant was the very worst. Yes, white Southern males who grew up when I did constantly were having their manhood challenged, and if you were a pissant, it probably also meant you were homosexual, so you might as well be dead. And we've all grown up to be homophobic? How could we not? It was ingrained in us from our earliest years that a homosexual was a sissy, walked and talked funny, couldn't tackle or block his sister, and had no business in the Boy Scouts, much less the military. The closest I ever came to being called a faggot, queer, or homo was when my mother told one of her friends she was still having to tie my shoes and I was already 9. My mother's friend had a son in my class, and she told him. At recess, her son said, in a voice you could have heard in Hogansville, which was 17 miles away, "Lewis's mother still ties his shoes." The other children on the playground snickered and pointed at me. Frankie Garfield walked over and punched me in the arm. So I had to prove my manhood. First, I thought of picking a fight with Frankie Garfield. Frankie would kill me, of course, but at least my legacy would be one of bravery, which might overcome the stupidity of picking a fight with Godzilla. But I was never much of one for pain, which I certainly would feel. Frankie was a strong believer in slow death. A boy in my class named Bobby Hosmer ate a live earthworm on the playground one day to impress the girls, and became the first Southerner ever to eat any bait, which would eventually be known as sushi. Maybe I could eat a live earthworm. I also thought better of that, too. Throwing up, which I most certainly would do, was also a sign of weakness. What I finally decided to do was to invite my friends over to the Atlanta and West Point Railroad tracks early one morning and prove my manhood by sticking my tongue onto one of the cold rails. It was rumored that a boy once stuck his tongue on a cold rail and then couldn't get it off. A few minutes later, the Crescent, westbound from Montgomery and New Orleans, came by and ran over his tongue and cut it off. I had cringed every time I thought of that story, which everybody knew, but what better way could I show my manhood than to risk my tongue to a speeding passenger train? I took a group of 5 over to the tracks one cold Saturday morning. "I am going to stick my tongue to one of these rails," I announced, "because I am not afraid I won't be able to get it off and a train will come by and cut it slap off." I must admit, however, I knew the westbound Crescent wouldn't be highballing through town, the train didn't stop in Moreland anymore, until much later in the day. And the worst thing that could happen to me was my friends would have to pull me and my tongue off the rail, and all I might lose was a little skin off the bottom. So I got down on my hands and knees and stuck my tongue to one of the cold rails. What I hadn't thought of, however, was the eastbound Crescent on its way to Atlanta was due a few seconds after I put my tongue to the rail. As my friends stood and watched in complete awe, I heard the blare of the front-end diesel horn as it rounded the curve a half-mile down the road. What if my tongue really was stuck to the rail? The train was getting closer now. Fortunately, I was able to determine my tongue wasn't stuck, and I could, in fact, get it out of the way of the train. But shouldn't I wait until the train was almost upon me before I pulled away from the tracks? I would be a hero. I would be a legend. Lewis waited till that train was bearing right down on him and his tongue, and at just the last second, he pulled his tongue off the rail and dived out of the way. It would be in the county weekly newspaper. They might even give me a parade. Grit might even want a first-person story. "The train's coming. It's going to cut Lewis's tongue off," the girls screamed, and one even started crying and invoking the name of Jesus. "Jesus Christ," said my friend Dudley Stamps, "this ought to be something." I waited until the crescent was approximately 100 yards away and closing. Then I pulled my tongue off the rail and flipped myself backwards away from the tracks. The crescent's horn was sounding a constant warning signal. It roared by and the engineer shook his fist. But I had proved my manhood. I was not a homo, and I had witnesses to prove it. What we are basically talking about here are weaknesses. We were taught by those same coaches and fathers to avoid any sign of weakness so as to avert any suspicions of pissantness or homosexuality. There are many, many other signs. Crying, one of the all-time signs of weakness. Crybaby. It was right up there with pissant. I cried once in front of my second wife when Green Bay fumbled on its own two and the Bears scored a touchdown, and she told everybody in her macrame class. We divorced a few months later. The judge said, "And Crybaby here will pay alimony in the sum of..." Liking girls. Any boy who showed anything but utter disdain for a girl until sometime during the 4th grade, when Kathy Sue started wearing her first bra, was considered weak. After that, anybody not liking girls was suspect. Being afraid of snakes. The problem with growing up was there were a lot of boys who weren't afraid of snakes. This is because they were under the misguided impression that there actually were different kinds of snakes, including varieties that wouldn't bite you. What the other boys in school didn't know that I know is that there is only one kind of snake, and that is the dreaded copper-headed water rattler. Copper-headed water rattlers are quite dangerous and even more cunning. They often go disguised as rats or garters. Not having a lot of chores to do. The Japanese should have been around to check out the work ethic in Moreland, Georgia in the 50s. It was extremely powerful. What I heard throughout my formative years was a continuous derision of people who wouldn't work. They didn't use the term welfare when I was growing up. It was relief. So strong was the work ethic, any person who had to go on relief was not only sorry, this person was a skunk, a scoundrel, and probably didn't even trust in Jesus Christ. Charity was one thing. A family got down due to sickness, say, and the community would respond, whether it meant taking over food, helping rebuild a burned-down house or barn, or even planting a crop for those who couldn't do it themselves. Such a tradition has lived even until today in some parts of the South. It's difficult for Southern men my age to understand welfare. It's because we come from a background that detested it so. We don't want people to starve, but we indeed become concerned over Ronald Reagan's welfare Cadillacs. Oh, that hatred for relief, the public dole was pounded into us. So, growing up had taught me to be quite careful about showing any tendencies toward weakness, to avoid being known either as a pissant or a mama's boy, which could lead to being known as a lot worse. I also learned not to hang around bus stations an inordinate length of time, which is my clever way of moving on to the next chapter and taking you with me. This chapter's gonna get me in a whole bunch of trouble. I first heard the phrase bus station queer when I was about 12. I was with a group of older and sexually wiser boys, and they were discussing a boy who was suspected of homosexuality. I shall call him Ralph. One of the older boys asked another, "You think Ralph is really a homo?" And the other replied, "Hell yeah, that son of a bitch would go down on you faster than a bus station queer." That phrase intrigued me. Bus station queer. Were bus stations gathering places for homosexuals? I'd ridden a gray dog a few times by then, but I hadn't seen any man I thought might be a homosexual. Finally, in my innocence, I asked aloud, "What's a bus station queer?" "It's somebody who hangs around the bus station," one of the older boys said, "and when some little pissant is going to ride the bus and goes into the restroom, he goes in there with you and goes down on you." "Goes down?" I asked. "Don't you know nothing?" Apparently, I didn't. Later, I would learn what it meant, of course. I also never went inside a bus station restroom again, no matter how much in need I was. Back to Ralph. No one had really seen him in any sort of compromising situation with another man, and nobody knew of any exact incident of him actually having sex with another man. It was just that Ralph had what was considered a lot of funny ways about him. He had a terrible trait of throwing a baseball like a girl. He plain didn't want to play baseball. Where Ralph made his fatal mistake, however, was trying to become the first boy to enroll in home ec in high school. A boy wanting to be in home ec class? The foundations of the high school building shook. I went along with all this, but even though I'm a straight southern white male, I certainly felt badly about my part in making Ralph's life miserable. Especially when I heard, 10 years after I'd gotten out of high school, that Ralph had a successful restaurant somewhere out in Arkansas, was married to a former Miss Little Rock, and they had 2 children. So I find myself today nearly at the half-century mark, living in the 90s and being confronted with lifestyle changes and the new sensitivity, trying to deal with my feelings about homosexuality. Let me say I have come this far at least. I have learned to say gay instead of all those other terms. And I don't know if I speak for all straight southern white males, but I basically don't care what any 2 or more adults want to do to one another's person. I would suggest, however, always wearing a condom. We are told now there are many homosexual males who show no effeminate characteristics whatsoever. I know there are macho-type gay men, I accept that, but let's face it, there are the flamers too, the ones with their fingers pointed backwards when they put their hands on their hips. The reason most straight southern white males are homophobic is that gays have many pissant tendencies, and we've been taught to detest anything pissantable. Look, I certainly understand about stereotyping. I really do. I get it all the time. You know the drill. All straight southern white guys are beer swillers, public belchers, just a couple of rungs up the food chain, go fishing a lot, and if they don't catch any fish, eat the worms. Another reason for my, as well as other SSWM's homophobia, is we hear a lot of stories about some of the weird things gay men do to one another sexually. We all know at least one doctor who had to intern in an emergency room and see what can happen when gay guys start messing around with one another. There's a lot of rectal insertion stories that go around, and if this offends you, know that I am mentioning this here in the name of broadening knowledge and asking the proverbial question all straight white southern males ask when they are astounded by something. Do what? I cannot end any discussion of male homosexuality without at least one comment about AIDS, which is a horrible thing and may get even worse. Let's fund research. Let's find a cure. Let's all use condoms. We know, of course, heterosexuals can get AIDS too. However, since the entire female population got together when I was about 14 and made a pact to do everything in their power to keep me celibate, I'm not too worried about getting AIDS in that fashion. You can also get AIDS by using dirty needles to stick dope in your arms. I missed out on dope. You can also contract AIDS through blood transfusions, and I've had my share of those because I've had 2 heart surgeries to replace the faulty aortic valve I came with. My doctors have given me the HIV test over and over, and so far, I'm safe. I realize it's a double standard to think of male homosexual sex as something sick and female homosexual sex as kinky, but frankly, I don't understand females having sex with males because I sure wouldn't do it. Men are too hairy for one thing, and they look like they were put together from spare parts from Eve, not the other way around. If you're a man, ever take a real close look at your body? I can fully understand desiring the female body. The only chance I'd ever have of being a homosexual is if I had been born a girl. As a matter of fact, I'm almost positive I'd have been a lesbian, but I'd have been a picky one. Kim Basinger? Yes. Martina Navratilova? Absolutely not. My problem with all homosexuals, however, is that they have become a real group of whiners too. They also have decided it's cute to flaunt their homosexuality, and they're getting downright pushy. They go around demanding too much also. I get tired of people who go around demanding all the time. We demand to be allowed to march in the parade. Hey, go form your own parade. Don't mess up anybody else's. They demand not being discriminated against in the workplace. If somebody owns a grocery store and doesn't want gay people working there for whatever reasons, it's that person's grocery store. It's that person who took the risk borrowing the money to open it, and it's that person's right to say who works there and who doesn't. If a black man opens a grocery store and doesn't want whites working there, that's his business. Where does it say the world is supposed to be fair all the time? I don't like the fact that there seems to be a tendency of gay people flaunting their homosexuality. Go back to your apartment or to a motel room. Register as Mr. and Mr. Smith. Fondle each other. Dress up like chickens. I honestly don't care. But damn if I want to have to see you do it. At least Pee Wee Herman picked a dark theater, even if he wasn't alone. Before I leave this subject and go on to offend somebody else, I should mention something about the word gay itself. We've lost a pretty good word in gay. I've been racking my brain here. That's not anything homosexuals do to one another, is it? Trying to figure out how homosexuals came to be known as gays in the first place. The only thing I can think of is perhaps the first two cavemen homosexuals finished their business and one felt sort of bad about the whole thing. But his companion said, "For goodness sake, you're so silly. Be like me. Be happy. Be proud. Be gay." Anything is possible, although there's no way you could ever convince me Fred and Barney were anything more than just pals. So I never ate a pig's knuckle. I'm still proud to be a good old boy. When the 1992 presidential primaries moved south, the media was full of references to the Bubba vote. Yet when the primaries went in the East, nobody referred to the loud-talking Yankee vote. When it was time for the California primary, there was nothing said about the nut and fruit vote, just the South. Why don't you people forget the Civil War I've heard so often from Northerners? Well, why don't y'all leave us the hell alone and stop thinking of the South as an odd appendage? How about stopping the stereotyping already? The Bubba vote, indeed. Allow me to explain Bubba once and for all. Bubba normally comes from the fact little sisters have trouble saying brother. They have trouble with daddy and mama as well as chrysanthemum, but that's another story. Bubba is sort of cute coming out of a little sister's mouth, and pretty soon the entire family is referring to the boy child that way. I'm not so sure it's an all-Southern, all-white thing. Remember Bubba Smith, the football player who went to the pros and was last seen in one of those Police Academy movies? Bubba Smith attended Michigan State, and he's black. They used to wear buttons at Michigan State football games that said, "Kill Bubba, kill." Wasn't that racist? Didn't that portray a black man as nothing more than a violent machine that had no feelings? If Bubba Smith had played at Ole Miss or at Georgia, you can bet some smarty pants from the New York Times would have taken "Kill Bubba, kill" and had a grand time with it, offering it as further proof of the backwardness and the racial insensitivity of the South. The poor Bubba redneck good old boy. Call us ignorant, sexist, racist, slovenly Neanderthals. We're the last group who hasn't risen up, formed some sort of coalition, and said, "You can't talk about us that way," because one of us would probably say, "One more word out of you, you little Yankee wimp faggot, and I'm going to cut you." And that would be playing right into the hands of our detractors. So what do? We take it for the most part. Occasionally one of us rises up, like me, but we are normally brushed aside as individuals still living in a sordid past of lynchings, queer rollings, Klan rallyings, and we want to keep all women down, not to mention barefoot and pregnant. I am not devoid of culture. I do like caviar, but I like pork barbecue better. I have 2 pairs of Gucci shoes in my closet. I wear Jeffrey Bean cologne, and I have a red Chevy Blazer. I will not, under any circumstances, turn my back on my heritage. I am proud of it, as a matter of fact, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. And allow me to tell you why you are wrong to use the word redneck if you do indeed do such a thing and show your own narrow-mindedness and dearth of intelligence. Here is how the word redneck came to be and took its modern-day definition. You are a southern dirt farmer. You don't own any slaves. Nobody in your family ever owned any slaves. It's simply what you do to make a living, a humble, honest, hard-working living. You go to church and you believe in God. You're patriotic. You care for your children. You care for your neighbors. Perhaps you haven't had a great deal of formal education. There wasn't time. Your father worked in the fields and his father before him, and you have fallen into line. You're in the fields before dawn because you know the amount of work that is to be done in order that your family be fed. You often stay in the fields after dark. You live in the South where it's hot. The sun beats down upon you. You work in a pair of overalls, and you plow and you plant and you reap, and that sun just keeps pounding down upon you. And your neck is red because of the hell-hot southern sun that beats down. It's red because it's your plot in life to work the soil. You feed yourselves. You feed nearly the whole damn world. But you're not polished. You're not assertive. You're neither politically correct or incorrect. You might think about politics some, but in your position, you know nobody wants to hear your views. You never complain. You're a good man to know if someone's barn burned down and needs rebuilding. You'd share your last biscuit with somebody you thought was needy and worthy. You took a little boy who was 6. His daddy had left him. And you raised him and taught him and gave him a memory he will never forget. Yeah, you were a redneck. And we put you back in that red clay of Georgia when your heart gave out on you in the fields one April day. You're Charles Bunyan Word of Heard County, Georgia, a foot-washing, shouting Baptist. Your Daddy Bun, my grandfather. You're a redneck, and you got that way honestly, and you were the kindest, gentlest, most loving man I've ever known. And when they put you in the ground, it broke my heart. I can still see you, hear you, smell you. You took me fishing. You watched ball games and westerns on television with me. You were my world for 7 years before you died. And you were a redneck, Daddy Bun. Your neck was parched by the sun for the 70 years you followed a mule and kept your family fed. Yeah, the redneck, the rube, the bumpkin, the hillbilly. The original redneck was a man or woman who, lacking in education or the ways of the urbane, raised families, refused relief at any cost, worshipped their God, and fought and died for their country. I want to take the word gay back, and I want to take away the connotation redneck has come to possess today. We need a better word. Call the scum of the earth, regardless of their color or origin, what they really are, the scum of the earth, not a redneck. I would really appreciate it because I don't want anybody talking bad about my grandfather. We need to make some progress in this area. Automatically assuming anyone from the South in general, and any straight white Southern male in particular, has a sheet hanging in his closet is just as prejudiced as thinking all black people will steal whatever isn't nailed down. As I mentioned, I've often been referred to as redneck. Some of those references were in jest, others were not. What I hope I am is a person of diverse interests who certainly has his faults, but just because he often writes about his native South, it doesn't necessarily mean he wants for the white race to take the country back and throw out every vestige of multiculturalism. Hell, if anybody ought to take the country back, it's the Indians. But if they want to be called something else besides Indians, I don't think Native Americans is the ticket. I sort of like the people who were here first. We must get back to this redneck good old boy thing, though, and take on the stereotypes that are always put upon us. That of being beer-swilling, hillbilly music listening, football-watching cavemen. I'll just start with beer. There's nothing wrong with drinking beer. In fact, there are a lot of things right about drinking beer. In the first place, you have to drink a lot more beers than you have to drink Beefeater very dry martinis to suddenly run outside and howl at the moon, pass out in your soup, or eat your host and hostess's cat. A lot of men prefer beer. I understand Paul Newman is one. But you throw the word swilling with beer, and here comes that image of Billy Carter, throwing him down and his belly getting bigger and his neck getting redder with every swallow. As far as I know, most beer swillers are college boys, and they swill just as often, I'm almost certain, in the Big Ten as they do in the Southeastern Conference. One of the reasons a lot of us drink beer is because it's a lot less trouble than trying to drink liquor in some locations. At the beach. I've tried to drink screwdrivers at a beach, but the ice melts too fast, and what you wind up drinking is a mixture of barely chilly water, orange juice, and vodka. Also, you have to take along a lot of cups, and because cups have large mouths, more sand can get into your drink than can get into a can of beer. And drinking liquor on a hot beach can cause one to go to sleep, a.k.a. pass out, and get a horrible sunburn, and or miss college girls walking by in thongs. With beer, you just fill up the ice chest. You don't have to worry about mixers, stirrers, your ice melting, cups, or getting sand in your drink. Getting sand in your bathing suit is bad enough. At baseball games, think what would happen if they served liquor by the drink at ball games. People would get even drunker than they do on beer, and if it happened to be bat night and everybody who came to the game got a miniature bat, there would be even more bat fights in the stands than there already are. Just look at it this way. Just because a man is Southern and he happens to drink beer, it doesn't necessarily follow he would be a swiller and devoid of redeeming qualities. So get off beer and Southern men who drink it. If you are still using the term hillbilly music, you're extremely outdated and, to be honest, a bit ignorant yourself. The proper term for what somebody might erroneously call hillbilly music today is, of course, country music. I think country is a perfect term for country music because it implies a certain earthiness, and if there's anything country is, it's earthy. Conway Twitty sang, "Even with your hair up in curlers, I'd still like to lay you down," and that goes about a good 3 feet into the ground there. But don't dare look down on me or my kind for being countrylophiles. Read this. Country music is now the most popular music in the United States. It has even touched some of the country's youth. There's a reason for that. Rock sucks. I was a fan of early 50s and 60s rock and roll. I liked Elvis, the Everly Brothers, the Platters, Jackie Wilson, the early works of Marvin Gaye, Stubborn Kind of Fella, Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs, the Drifters, Bobby Vee, Bobby Vinton, Gene Pitney, the Corsairs, the Showmen, and hallowed be their names, the Temptations and the Four Tops. I was at the University of Georgia from 1964 until 1968, a time of great musical appreciation on my part. I was a member of Sigma Pi fraternity. We had a jukebox in the dance room that may have been one of the great 50s and 60s rock and roll jukeboxes of all times, and you didn't have to put any money in it. The jukebox rocked around the clock for the entire 4 years I was connected with the fraternity. It's probably a dead heat what song got played the most, Marvin Gaye's Stubborn Kind of Fella or the Temptations' My Girl. What's happened to music is exactly what's happened to a lot of other things in this country. It's gone crazy. It's done worse than that. It's become sick, demented, nasty. It's become dangerous. Call me whatever you want to call me, but rap is getting people killed and raped. One of those goofballs sings about putting a bullet in the head of any Korean that gets in a black's way. The Koreans open grocery stores and make decent livings, which pisses off the blacks in the neighborhoods, and why shouldn't it, the racist little gooks? How dare they open grocery stores near black neighborhoods in order to feed themselves and their families? What they should do, of course, is give away their grocery stores to the angry blacks. Reverend Al Sharpton could show up and make a speech, get himself on television, and probably get himself a nice little percentage of the grocery store business for as long as it lasted without the Asian work ethic. Rap is violent. It uses every possible bad word it can get out of its filthy mouth, and that's just great for inner-city kids to listen to. Yo, let's listen to some rap and then go out and do a drive-by shooting. If you're a parent, go upstairs right now and search your child's room for violent, sexually demented, sick, and filthy rap music. Take it downstairs and burn it, and then go back upstairs with a large stick and beat your kid until he or she promises never to spend your hard-earned money on such filth and bring it under your roof again. That's better than censorship. I realized the adults raised all hell when I was coming along about our timid rock and roll and Elvis. But God knows what is Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets compared to Come Sit on My Face While I Have Unnatural Sex with a Rogue Elephant by the Butthole Surfers? What was Elvis compared to rockers who pulled their Johnsons out in mid-concert and waved them at an adoring crowd of 14-year-olds? And country is hillbilly? Country is sane. It's moral. It's sweet and it's tender. It speaks, God forbid, in the 90s, of values. And country music is good enough for Charlie Pride. By the way, if you've never heard of Charlie Pride, he's had about a dozen or so huge country hits, and the man is black. Spike Lee breaking into movie making as a black producer is one thing. Charlie Pride making it in Nashville more than 20 years ago is something else altogether. To heck with Spike Lee. Somebody ought to give Charlie Pride the Color Barrier Breaker of All Time award. Country has its own network show now, Hot Country Nights, its own cable channel. There's a country station in New York City, and country's even big in Europe and Asia, as well as parts of New Jersey, speaking of foreign locales. Now, we are number one. Now, let's take college football watching from the strict Southern male viewpoint. A former colleague of mine, Ed Hinton, was most insightful, I thought, on just why Southern men can take a life-or-death stance on a college football game. You think about it, he said, except for Vietnam, the Southern white male is the only American male ever to lose a war. That shame has been passed down from generation to generation. I think the white Southern male of today is just as combative, just as proud of his heritage as they were in Civil War times. But there's no war. What there is college football. It's something to attach oneself to. It's a cause. It has to do with pride. I've often thought about Hinton's deduction. I think he's on target. What really makes me laugh is all this recent garbage about the exploitation of the black athlete and the plantation mentality of major football programs, and the criticism is aimed mostly at Southern programs. After years and years of segregation, black athletes were given the same opportunity as white athletes to compete. But then came all the nonsense that some schools were using black kids to further their athletic programs and make the head coach and athletic director rich with no concern of how the students were doing in the classroom. Here is how a black athlete is exploited at most schools today. He or she gets a paid-in-full college education. He or she lives in an athletic dorm, gets steak for dinner, the latest in equipment, the latest in training methods. What the athlete must do in return for all that is practice his or her butt off and keep his or her butt academically eligible to play under rules that are getting stricter each year. How is that exploiting? The dean of the journalism school at the University of Georgia didn't make sure I was in class every day, didn't lead me by the hand to the library to study, didn't provide me with tutors. I worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and was married in college. I didn't sleep for 4 years. Big deal. A lot of people had it tough in college, but a lot of people also hung in there and got their degrees. If they didn't, it was nobody's fault but their own. When will the reformers realize big-time sports isn't hurting anybody? It's helping a lot of us to enjoy life. It's helping the schools as well. There is nothing wrong with college football now, and it doesn't need repairing. It needs nurturing. It needs protection from the non-believers. Does this sound like a holy war? It is to me. It is to a lot of straight Southern white guys. A man I knew surveyed Sanford Stadium in Athens one evening before a Georgia-Clemson nationally televised game. The stadium was filled to capacity. People were happy. It was an enchanted night. He said, when I was in Vietnam, I really used to wonder what I was fighting for. I believe it was for this. Hand me a piece of fried chicken, another deviled egg, and a cold beer. Kick off his knife, Bubba. I suppose the one thing I've spent the most time trying to figure out since 1962 is, with the exception of my mother, grandmother, and aunts, why I can't get along with women for more than, say, 11 minutes straight. I bring up 1962 specifically because that's the year I got my driver's license, which afforded me the opportunity to spend even more time with women than I had previous to that. I don't think women, or girl persons, really take a man, or boy person, seriously until he has a driver's license and can drive them places in a car. In fact, until a boy is 16 and able to get his driver's license, it's almost impossible to have any sort of real involvement with a girl. That's because girls 14 or 15 are all out at the drive-in or cruising the Dairy Queen with boys who are 16 and over and have their driver's licenses. If you aren't old enough to drive yet, you spend a lot of time developing your curveball and counting the days until you're 16 so you can go to the drive-in and cruise the Dairy Queen with girls 14 or 15 who will think you are so mature, especially when you pull out on the highway after leaving the drive-in and peel rubber. When I was growing up, peeling rubber was referred to as getting a wheel. For a boy-man driver of an automobile, it was another sign of weakness if he didn't get a wheel at every opportunity to do so. Leaving school was a very important time to get a wheel. Only pissants, science club members, and other social misfits didn't get a wheel when they left school. Most of them also usually were picked up by their mothers and driven home for their piano lessons. Not so the cool, mature guys. When school was out at Newton High, it sounded like the Indy 500 time trials in the student parking lot. I'm convinced the cool, mature types single-handedly kept the Goodyear Tire Company in business between the years of 1960 and 1964 when I was in high school. My relationship with females began to go downhill the very first night I had my driver's license. I had a date with the woman who later would become my first wife, the lovely Paula. Naturally, our date was to go to the drive-in and do some major fogging up of the windows. Our relationship began to deteriorate when I decided that I'd cruise by the Dairy Queen now that I finally had come of age to do such a wondrous thing. The cruising part went well, but when I started to pull out onto the highway for the drive-in, the trouble began. A couple of my friends screamed at me, "Hey, Lewis, get a wheel!" There I was, my moment to shine, to join that great fraternity of wheel getters. I felt deep panic. Was I supposed to put the gear in L first, or would D suffice? I decided in my panic L probably stood for leap. So I pulled it down to L, stomped the accelerator, and shot across the street into a large trash receptacle. I looked into the mirror to see what the reaction had been to my first attempt to get a wheel. My friends were doubled up with laughter. To make matters worse, when we finally got to the drive-in, the movie was Robert Mitchum in Thunder Road. At least 3/4 of it were taken up by Robert Mitchum getting wheels throughout the entire state of Tennessee. I could tell Paula was terribly upset. My first clue was when she said, "This is the most embarrassing moment of my life." I've always been perceptive that way. We stayed through the entire performance of Thunder Road and watched every second of it. My window remained completely unfogged. Luckily, there was only a small dent in the front bumper of the Pontiac as a result of the collision with the dumpster. I told my mother somebody had backed into me as I was parked at the Dairy Queen, which she believed, which is one of the reasons I got along with my mother. Things never improved with women after that, and here I am, 30 years later, and I still have a terrible time getting along with them. Maybe that's the way it is with all straight Southern white males. None of us have any clue as to what women really want or how to please them. One reason for that, I suppose, is we have steadfastly resisted becoming the sensitive male they write about in women's magazines and newspapers' lifestyle sections, which, more and more, are being run by women editors. What began to happen was the women editors of lifestyle sections decided to go after men. I'm not certain when most women began to hate most men, but it probably had something to do with Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda was a traitor to her country and didn't have anything bad happen to her. So women all over the country figured, if she can do that, I don't have to fix dinner anymore. Little by little, the resentment, the hatred, began to come out for men. Suddenly, on the covers of women's magazines were headlines like this: "What does your husband do when you say, 'We need to talk'?" Turns up the volume on the Cubs game. "When is the last time he sexually satisfied you?" November 8, 1971, the day I was going through his workshop and found the Black & Decker power drill with a couple of rather interesting attachments. "What is your man's sexual IQ?" 4 years ago, he said, "I quit." "When is the last time you saw a man cry?" When I told my husband I'd run over his dog. "What's wrong with separate vacations once in a while?" "We already have them. He goes fishing and I stay in the cabin and keep the grease hot." "Women who refuse to shave their legs and under their arms." A brief history of the Virginia Slims tennis tour. "How to tell your husband I want to work too. Send him a postcard. They pick up the mail twice a week on the offshore oil rigs. How to get out and stay out of the kitchen. Set fire to the sucker. How to spot the sensitive male. He ordered a salad and white wine when all his buddies ordered a cheeseburger and a beer. So women started reading anti-men articles, and then Phil Donahue got a television show and went around being sensitive from coast to coast 5 mornings a week, and that led to the era of the burning of the bra. So, what we had then were braless women who all wanted to find a sensitive male like Phil Donahue. The problem was, most men thought, and still do, that Phil Donahue either sold out to gain television popularity or was an ex-pissant who probably took home ec in school. The truth of the matter, at the outset of the formation of the New Woman, was they wanted their men to become pissants. Yes, pissants. Do you know how confusing that became to men, especially men like me with the background I had? It became confusing as hell. That's how confusing it became. Men all over the country allowed themselves to be steamrolled into submission and gave up golf to take their wives to disco dancing lessons. I do take a certain amount of pride, however, in the fact I believe a larger percentage of SSWMs resisted than our brothers from other parts of the country. SSWMs tend to be stubborn and don't give up easily. Perhaps SSWNs resisted being run over by the great female cowdozer, saying bulldozer would be politically incorrect, because of the way we were treated by our mothers. Mama spoiled me, and that's probably the primary reason I've never been able to get along with women. None ever did for me like my mama did, and that really surprised me. That's the way it's been for me and a lot of other guys. We wanted a cross between Gina Lollobrigida, Betty Crocker, and Mother Teresa. Sadly, there aren't any. Straight Southern white men like order in their life. They like tradition. They saw how it was with Mama and Daddy, and that's the way they thought it would be when they came of age. But no. By the time straight Southern white men of my generation reached 35, all hell had broken loose. There was no order. There was no holding to tradition. Subservient women who reminded us of Mama no longer existed. Women had decided they didn't want to be women anymore, and so they basically became like men always have been, ambitious, greedy, pushy, want it all, want it now individuals. All the rules changed. Sexual rules changed dramatically too. The thing that shocked me the most when the female orgasm was invented by the women's liberation movement is that women have a thing for male buttocks. I'd never known that, but once I found out, it explained a lot to me. I never seemed to get anywhere with women based on my looks, no matter how hard I tried. I realized there wasn't a lot of raw material with which to work, but I always tried to keep myself clean and smelling good. When I learned about the buttock fetish, I knew the problem immediately. I don't have a butt. Women, men soon learned, actually enjoyed sex too. Previously, a lot of us, including myself, thought it was just something they had to endure so a man could have his jollies. But not so. Men came to learn women actually enjoyed sex more than they did. That's because once the women's movement began, women decided it was okay to go ahead and scream their heads off during orgasm. Women also are no longer afraid to have multiple orgasms. In fact, some demand it. There was a positive side to the changes in sex that occurred because of the women's movement. There suddenly were more opportunities to have sex with women than before. Women became more sexually aggressive and more likely to agree to sex on the first date, rather than holding out until you married them or you both graduated, whichever came first. But that soon became more of a pain than a blessing due to cable television. Hey, ball games out the wazoo! After being the pursuer for so long, the man now often becomes the pursuee. The better way to say that is, "Not now, honey. Miami's about to score." I honestly think women's liberation has had a lot to do with men simply saying to themselves, "I don't need this crap. I'm never going to find anybody to treat me like Mama did, so I'll just give up and find me a good dog." Some men may have even gone the homosexual route once they became so turned off by the new assertiveness of women and the fact that what many of them really want is your testicles in a jar. We've also got to speak here about sexual harassment in the workplace, which is another new issue they can't stop writing about on the front page of the living sections. Sexual harassment, as it is defined now, is when you walk into your office and make any reference to your secretary looking smartly, and she hauls your butt to court for sexual harassment. But didn't our mothers tell us before we went out on our dates, always compliment a young lady on her appearance? Haven't we heard from thousands of women, wives et al., you never tell me how pretty I look anymore? But let's go to the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas thing. What was interesting about that is most straight Southern white guys I know were pulling for Clarence to be confirmed as Supreme Court Justice. I think simply it's a matter of all men, black, white, or whatever, are terribly confused about today's woman. They also are tired of them whining and bitching. That's the thing here. We can't get the men's grill at the country club. We can't get Lee Iacocca's job with Chrysler. We never get to play Hamlet. Whine, whine, bitch, bitch. Teddy Kennedy, Mr. Liberal, Mr. Big Fat Rich Boy, Mr. Don't Worry, I've driven over this bridge millions of times, was on the Senate panel that considered the Clarence Thomas nomination and had to deal with the sexual harassment charges by Anita Hill. Why didn't he decline? Here's a man with more sexual skeletons in his closet than all the television evangelists combined, sitting on a Senate panel in judgment of some black judge who may or may not have made some sort of move on Anita Hill. Why didn't he decline? Instead, he showed up on the Senate panel and has set a new indoor record for looking uncomfortable. Herman Goering seemed more relaxed at the Nuremberg trials. And no sooner had the Clarence Thomas hearings ended when we were treated to live coverage of cousin William Kennedy Smith's rape trial. Of course, Teddy was involved in that case too, and he looked as guilty there as he did on the Thomas hearings. And what was a man of his age doing out with his nephew at 2 a.m. in a Palm Beach bar in the first place? I thought with the trials of Clarence Thomas and William Kennedy Smith over, we would get a break from such sexual gore. But I neglected to remember Mike, stop me before I fondle again, Tyson, was still on the loose. Know why Mike Tyson always cries when he makes love? Mace. Then the presidential campaign began, and we all knew somebody would get nailed with sexual misconduct because of the Gary Hart rule of politics, which is also a boxing adage. You can run, but you can't hide. Sure enough, it was Arkansas Democrat Bill Clinton and the Blondes. Ever really look at the wife when a politician gets nailed for fooling around? They show up and stand next to their husband who gives it the old, sure, we've had problems in our marriage like everybody else, but we've stuck by each other through it all. What that really means is, I promised if my wife would show up and act like it's no big deal with her, if I make it to the White House, I'll buy her a lot of neat clothes like Jackie Kennedy had and let her make all the key decisions during my presidency. No discussion of women's liberation and the relationship between men and women would be complete without bringing up money. Not every divorce I got, not every relationship that has ended for me had to do with money. The reason money never entered into my first 2 divorces was I didn't have any. By the time I got around to getting my 3rd divorce, I'd accumulated a few shekels. She took her share when she left, and she also took my popcorn popper. My favorite line about divorce came from I know not where nor whom. I'll just have to say that somewhere in time, a man was creamed in a divorce settlement and subsequently was asked, think you'll ever get married again? To which he replied, no, every 5 years or so, I'm just going to find a woman I hate and give her a house. Last and final chapter, thank God. I need to explain my politics and exactly what I would do if I were president. Right is where I am on the political spectrum. The only good liberal is one who has been thrown out of office or is up in Alaska somewhere trying to save the whales and isn't around to get on my very last nerve. Let's take some key issues of today, and I'll tell you where I stand on them. Immigration. America first, with apologies to one of my heroes, Pat Buchanan. Trade barriers. Tell the Japs if they try to sell us one more Toyota, we're cranking up the Enola Gay again. Meanwhile, allow American producers to sell anywhere they'll buy, which also brings up foreign aid. Foreign aid. Give everybody in the world who is starving some food. If one of our friends needs some weapons to battle one of their enemies, we get Schwarzkopf and go in and blow away the enemy of our friends ourselves. Cut out the middleman. Tax incentives for the rich. We ought to keep the rich as possible because nobody poor was ever able to afford to give anybody else a job. Defense. Stay strong. I don't trust anybody. Capital punishment. I'm for it. Not a single person ever executed for murder committed another one. I probably just hit the highlights of current political issues, But I did leave out at least two because, believe it or not, there are at least two in regard to which I don't have a strict right-wing opinion. I'll start with gun control. I'm for it. I know that might be a shock after what I've said here before, but I do believe guns kill people. And if there were a lot less guns, a lot less people would get shot by them. The gun nuts with the National Rifle Association, whose motto is shoot first, make a rational decision later, claim that any form of gun control eventually will lead to a total ban on firearms. That's like saying when the speed limit was lowered, eventually we wouldn't be able to drive at all. What I want is some form of gun control that keeps guns out of the hands of people who might shoot other people. What else I would do is not let anybody have any sort of gun that could shoot up an entire apartment complex in 8 seconds. Make automatic weapons illegal for everybody who isn't about to go into war. And hide the guns so no kids can find them. If the kid did find one and shot his or herself or somebody else, then the person who got the gun in the first place would be charged with all sorts of crimes. That would make adults a lot more careful about putting their guns in places their children couldn't get their hands on them. None of this, of course, fits with the usual stereotyping of the conservative, and neither does my stance on abortion. I'm for it, sort of. I don't mean to waffle here, but I figure if it's my body, I've got a right to do with it what I want. The sort of part here, however, is very few women ever get pregnant by accident. I mean, a jar of sperm doesn't fall over somewhere and some of those little devils don't crawl into an unsuspecting womb. So I figure women who don't want to become pregnant should not have sex. There hasn't been one other single report of an immaculate conception for nearly 2,000 years now. Contraceptives work, but not always. Just to be on the safe side, however, another idea is always to wear pantyhose and in any situation whatsoever refuse to take them off. Pantyhose are the modern version of the chastity belt. There are instances where I think abortions are absolutely necessary. One is, of course, if having the baby would endanger the mother's life. Another is if a rape has occurred, or if it's a 12-year-old girl whose parents had refused to let her take sex education classes. I'm against welfare, but as long as we have it, I'd stop it for any welfare mother with 9 children already who gets pregnant again. I would say no more welfare unless you get an abortion. And don't give me this I didn't mean to get pregnant again look. Here's a dime. Make certain you hold this sucker between your knees at all times, and we won't have to go through this messy little situation over and over again. Animal rights? I'm for them in most instances because I don't like to see anybody harm a dog. But I still want to eat steak and barbecue. I feel the real problem we have with the hottest issues of the day is it all comes down to too much either or. Nobody's willing to compromise because fighting and screaming and getting on TV is a lot more fun than sitting down to take it point by point. One thing that's wrong with this country is the form of government we have now. Wasn't it the idea of Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and the boys that the federal government be weak and stay the hell out of our lives for the most part? It was. Here is what I would do if somebody asked me to take charge of all the problems we have in this country. I'd basically do away with the federal government and allow the states to figure out things on their own. The only thing I think the federal government should be involved in is making sure we have a strong defense to fight foreigners in case that becomes necessary. We would elect a president to be simply commander-in-chief of our armed forces. He would say who we were going to bomb and when. What you do first is disband Congress. Make them all go back home and get a real job. Once a year, all the state governors would have a convention to discuss anything they needed done on a national basis, which shouldn't be a hell of a lot if the states ran themselves free of federal interference. How simple that would be. How clean that would be. That's what the Founding Fathers had in mind in the first place. If they had known the federal government was going to grow to the size it is today, they probably would have said, hell, we might as well let the British stay. Maybe they don't have as many lawyers. I fully realize, however, the chances of my idea of dismantling about 98% of the federal government has no chance of actually happening. It's too radical, and it makes too much sense. But if there's one thing I think we can do that could be adopted rather easily. Under our present system, there is no way to really monitor the performance of the congresspersons we send to Washington. First, we go to a one-term limit on members of Congress. Now we've got to make people elected to Congress realize they can't screw around with us and not have to pay a penalty. So each state also elects somebody to sit on a panel, the Congressional Review Board. I like that. When a senator or representative had served his 6 or 4 years, this person would go before the Congressional Review Board, who would have been given a record of this person's activities while in office. Voting record, the absentee record, how many DUIs were there, all that sort of stuff. Then the board would vote on whether this person did a good job or a bad job while in office. If the vote said good job, this person would be allowed to live. If not, this scoundrel would go before a National Rifle Association firing squad. I realize all this sounds terribly harsh, but it's time for a little harshness. So that's my politics, and those are my plans. Well, that pretty much does it. And if I forgot anything, I still have 1 book left on my current contract, so there's always next year. But at least I've had my say, and at least there was still somebody around who would let me have it. Freedom of expression certainly is being hindered, but I managed to get these thoughts through. So I leave you now, the same as I started. Still a confused, often bewildered, heterosexual, southern white male. I think what I'll do now is put on a Willie Nelson tape, call my dog Catfish over beside me, put my feet up on the coffee table, and have myself a cool beer. God bless America, and how about them dogs?
This has been a Random House Audiobooks presentation. We hope you have enjoyed this audio program. Look for other titles by Louis Grizzard available on audio cassette from Random House. Among them are You Can't Put No Boogie Woogie on the King of Rock and Roll, My Daddy Was a Pistol and I'm a Son of a Gun, and Elvis is Dead and I Don't Feel So Good Myself. All read by the author.